This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
A Torah Anytime original series.
One of the best ways that a company or an organization or a book could convey its mission statement is by choosing a good name, a name that encapsulates the very essence of the company or the team or the organization. Hatzalah, in one word, it sums up exactly who they are and what they stand for. Or Home Depot, it's exactly what its name says it is. It's a store for all your household needs. Or Tesla, new, exciting, electrifying. A good name is often essential in conveying the purpose you're trying to achieve. So when you look at all the names of the books of the Torah, they all do a great job in encapsulating what's contained inside. For example, Bereshis, the entire Sefer Bereshis is in essence the physical and spiritual beginning and development of the world. Pretty good title word. Or Vayikra, the entire Sefer, Rashi says, is a loving call from Hashem teaching us how to properly serve Him with karbanos. Or Bamidbar, it is the entire story of the Jews in the desert. Or Devarim, it is the entire speech that Moshe gave in the last day of his life. But then comes Shemos. Names? How does that encapsulate the entire Sefer? What does names have to do with the exile in Mitzrayim? What does Shemos have to do with getting out of Egypt and going into the desert? What does names have to do with camping around Har Sinai and receiving the Torah? What does Shemos have to do with building a Mishkan? So the Baal HaTurim says something fascinating on the words Shemos, which can perhaps shed a little bit of light on our question. He says that the word Shemos is really an acronym for Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum. This refers to the obligation for every male to learn the Torah twice each week with the translation. Now, there's an obvious question. Why is the Torah suddenly, right at the beginning of Sefer Shemos, telling me about the mitzvah to do Shnayim Mikra? Shouldn't the Torah have reminded me like a long time ago somewhere in Sefer Bereshis? Shouldn't the Torah allude to this mitzvah somewhere closer to the beginning of the year when we begin our cycle of Torah reading? Like, isn't it a little bit late in the game to be reminding me of Shnayim Mikra? So perhaps there is a rhyme and reason for choosing to place the reference to Shnayim Mikra right at the beginning of Shemos. Perhaps it's to tell us a powerful message. Perhaps the Torah is telling us that you want to know the key to surviving exile. Do you want to know the secret to making it out of persecution alive? Do you want to know how to thrive in a desert? It's Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum. It's the week in and week out consistent learning of Torah that will keep us and protect us throughout this long trek we are embarking on. The Torah specifically waits until Sefer Shemos to tell me about the mitzvah of learning the weekly Torah reading. For Shemos begins the Gullus. Shemos begins our journey into the desert. Shemos begins our voyage that will eventually crisscross the entire world. Shemos begins our trek that took us to Iran and Iraq, to Spain and Portugal, to Yugoslavia and Yemen, and to France and to Germany and to Morocco and Russia and Egypt and Africa and Australia and Austria and China and Norway and Bosnia and Croatia and Chile and Mongolia and everywhere in between. Precisely there do we need a reminder about the mitzvah of Shnayim Mikra, because it is the secret. It is the key. Keeping the Torah close by is the antidote to the poison of exile. Week in and week out, month in and month out, year in and year out, century in and century out, no matter where our journey takes us, the Torah must be by our side if we want to survive. Ever wonder why the Torah was given in a desert? Why did Hashem choose to give it there of all places? Why not wait a few more days, walk us calmly into Eretz Yisrael, and give us the Torah on Har HaMoriah, a mountain already drenched in holiness, instead of some random, obscure, barren Har Sinai in the middle of nowhere? I think the answer hit me one night while I was rocking my baby to sleep. If you ever held a newborn at 2 a.m, you know the drill. You rock, you sway up and down, side to side, back and forth, and somehow it works. The baby settles, the crying fades, and he falls back asleep. Now imagine trying that with a 40-year-old man who he woke up in the middle of the night and he couldn't fall back asleep. And you pick him up and you start rocking him. He wouldn't drift off. He'd probably slap you across the face. So why does it calm a baby? The answer is because for 9 months that baby lived inside of motion. The mother's womb wasn't quiet, it wasn't still, it was constantly moving, it was rhythmic up and down, it was alive. The rocking doesn't disturb the baby, it reminds the baby of home. And that's the key. The Jewish people were born in a desert. There was no natural food, there was no natural water, there was scorching heat, there was enemies on every side, nothing stable, nothing predictable, no safety net, no comfort, no calm, and that's exactly where we received the Torah. Not in peace, not in comfort, not in quiet, not when everything was finally set up. Hashem didn't want us to wait until we get into the land and we set up our bagel stores and our coffee shops. No, he wanted us to get the Torah in the desert, to make something abundantly clear for all generations. We were born into difficulty, and Torah became our oxygen inside of it. That's why we survive. We survive things no other nation survives. That's why no condition ever stopped us. We learned Torah in places where it was illegal. We learned in basements, in cellars, in caves, in forests, in attics, under the threat of prison, under the threat of death, with guards outside, with enemies watching, with nothing but a flickering candle and a sefer. Empires tried to crush us, and Torah kept breathing. Regimes outlawed us, and Torah kept growing. Poverty, exile, persecution, none of it became an excuse. None of it became a reason to stop. No desert was hot enough to stop us. You want to know why? Because we were born in one. We didn't wait for ideal circumstances to learn. We don't need silence or safety or comfort. We learned Torah when the world was shaking, because that's the world we were born into. You want to know why we can learn anywhere? Why Torah survives every exile? Why no amount of pressure ever breaks it? Because we were born in a desert. And deserts don't produce comfort. They produce people who don't need it. We were born in a desert, and therefore, we don't wait for conditions to be right. We make them right. Ever wonder where the word yeshiva comes from? People assume it means it's a place to sit and learn. But that can't possibly be right, because there have been yeshivas since the times of Shem ve'Ever, and yet the Gemara in Megillah, Daf Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, it says that from the days of Moshe until Reb Gamliel, Torah was learned only standing up, similar to the way that we say Shemona Esrei. So clearly, the word yeshiva doesn't mean sitting, because we weren't sitting at all. So then what does it mean? The answer is the word yeshiva doesn't mean to sit. It means to dwell, to settle yourself, to plant your feet eternally, to build a cocoon that blocks out the noise. A yeshiva is the ability to create yeshiva das, inner clarity and calm, so Torah can live inside, no matter what's happening around you. Chaos outside, stability inside. And we mastered that because we were born in a desert, a place with no quiet, no comfort, no control, and yet that's where the Torah took root. That's why we don't need perfect conditions to learn. We don't wait for silence. We don't wait for comfort. We create a yeshiva wherever we are, because the people born in a desert learned how to carry Torah without needing the world to cooperate. Listen to this story. I heard the following story from Reb Aaron Gruman, and it never left me. Steve Goldman was the son of an extraordinarily wealthy executive, and he went to Harvard. He graduated second in his class. He was a sensational tennis player. You couldn't design a brighter future if you tried. Money, prestige, talent, access, the whole world was open in front of him. And then his kidneys failed. And suddenly the trajectory cracked, and the dreams narrowed, and the ceiling came down. And he left Harvard, and he went to change scenery in Princeton University. And one day, while giving a class at Princeton, Rabbi Gruman met Steve, and he befriended him, and he invited him to spend the Shabbos in Beis Medrash Gevaya in Lakewood, New Jersey. This was 1990, back when BMG really had only one building, the Yashan. And on Friday night, Rabbi Gruman gave him a tour, the Beis Medrash, the dining room, and then the basement, the Eitzer, the library. And it was winter, Friday nights were long, and the room was packed. People crammed in there learning under piles of ancient svarim, old binding, yellowing pages, books stacked on tables and shelves and chairs, and there was no polish, there was no glamour, just Torah, raw and alive. And Steve just froze. He couldn't move. He just stood there staring. And on Motzei Shabbos, as they were about to leave Lakewood, Steve turned to Rabbi Gruman and asked quietly, almost nervously, if they could go back down to the Eitzer one more time, and they went. And again, Steve, he just stood there, silent, transfixed. And finally, Rabbi Grumman couldn't hold it in anymore. He turned to Steve and he said, I don't understand. At Harvard and Princeton, you have some of the largest, most impressive libraries in the world, endless resources, perfect lighting, pristine shelves. Why are you so overwhelmed by a basement filled with old, falling apart books? Steve looked at him and said words that go straight to the bone. He said, because at Harvard, you walk into the library and you see people reading books. Here, I see people living them. That's what Torah is. Torah is not a subject. It's not information. It's not culture or nostalgia. Torah is life itself. It's not something we visit. It's something we inhabit. It's not something we add. It's what everything else is built around. It's not one value among many. It is the engine that gives value to everything else. That's why we can learn in basements. That's why we can learn in exile. That's why we can learn when it's uncomfortable and inconvenient and costly. Because Torah isn't what we do. Torah is who we are. And that's the secret that has carried us through every generation. When Torah is your everything, no circumstance can take it away from you. You don't protect Torah for comfort. You protect it by living it. And that's why, no matter how dark the world gets, there will always be Jews in a corner of this globe somewhere under a pile of old Svarim, quietly keeping the world alive. Listen to this story. For decades, year after year, every Friday, tucked into the bottom right corner of the New York Times, there was a small, unassuming box. It read, Jewish women should light the Shabbat candles at such and such a time. Week after week, year after year, it was there, decade after decade. That box was faithfully there every Friday. And then one day, it vanished. The sponsor, who passed away, had passed away, and the paper moved on, and the world kept spinning, and that quiet Friday reminder disappeared as if it was never there. Years later, on January 1st, 2000, the New York Times released its much-anticipated Millennium Edition. The front page was split into 3 sections. 1/3 reprinted the front page from January 1st, 1900. One third showed the present day, January 1st, 2000. And then the final third imagined the future, January 1st, 2100. And that future page was strange. One headline debated half seriously whether robots should be allowed to vote. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the headline. It was the bottom right corner, there in a familiar little box. There were the words no one expected to be there. Jewish women shall light Shabbat candles at such and such a time. And people were stunned. It hadn't appeared in years, so why did it suddenly return on page predicting the future? So the editor-in-chief at the time, an Irish gentleman, was asked, what is that box doing there? And his answer was extraordinary. He said, when we were sitting in the boardroom trying to imagine what the world would look like in 100 years, we realized something humbling. We can't predict anything. Not politics, not technology, not culture. We don't know what the world will be. But there's one thing we do know. And that is that Jewish women will be lighting Shabbat candles on Friday night. I don't know how, but they've been doing it for the last 3,000 years, and they'll do it for the next 3,000. You hear that? That's not nostalgia. That's certainty. And here's the secret behind it. Our nation has something the world doesn't fully understand. We have something called the Torah. A Torah that guided us and challenged us and carried us and refused to let us go. A Torah that walked us through the darkest chapters of human history, that has held our hand in ghettos and in concentration camps and prisons and caves. It bent down and it picked us up and it dusted us off and it carried us on its wings across continents and centuries and oceans. It has been our pipeline to heaven, our connection to infinity, and we in return don't treat it like a book. We learn it, we love it, we sing it, we cry over it, we dance with it from the very beginning of our exile. The Torah gave us the antidote to exile. It revealed the formula for Jewish survival, and that is to stay attached to Torah. Learn it again and again. Return to it week after week. Be there for it, and it will be there for you. That's not a slogan. That's not poetry. That's a survival strategy. Empires predict the future with charts and algorithms. We predict it with Shabbos candles. Because as long as Torah lives in Jewish homes, as long as candles are lit on Friday night, as long as we keep choosing eternity over trends, the Jewish future isn't a question, it's a guarantee.
just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.